was asked to review a comic of the sort that I typically don't read, a pulp noir thriller called Biophile Kolga. Now, I'm a mangaka by trade, a comic creator of the Japanese manga style, so initially I was hesitant to review it because I didn't want to go into the comic with bias due to a lack of understanding of the genre. But I ultimately decided to give it a read and review because it's so important to look at other stories to understand the different ways that narratives can be presented. And then I had an epiphany that I'll tell you about while I give my review on this pretty cool indie comic. Before we get into any of the storytelling aspects, I want to touch on the art. Right away, you could see that the colors that are used, the color palettes, and the line style is so bold and so interesting. I absolutely love the sort of sci-fi feel, the sort of dark yet bright at the same time artistic direction of Biophile Kolga. It's very, very, very artistically pleasing. You could see that the contrast in the colors that are chosen are very interesting. The gradients look really great. The anatomy of the characters looks good too. There are some, little quirks here and there with the continuity of the characters' faces towards the beginning of the work, which, as a comic artist, it's very hard to keep the characters looking identical from panel to panel. I can attest to that. So it's not a nitpick that I think is worth spending any time on. The monsters are drawn in a very detailed and eerie way. If you love thriller and you love, gore, this is definitely for you. I absolutely loved mostly, though, just the color contrast. There are so many pages and panels here that just look really, really pleasing and cool. And there's like a clear theme with the artistic direction in Biophile Kolga, which is really strong. A lot of indie works that I've read in the past seem to kind of suffer with this. They either copy something else too strongly or they don't seem to have a very strong artistic theme. I don't think that this comic suffers from that at all. One thing that I will say about the lettering is that at times I did feel the bubbles could be a little hard to follow. Sometimes I found myself reading left to right and sometimes right to left, but this could just be because I don't know how to read it properly. I am a mangaka, and so I create my comic in right to left, so this is slightly new to me. With that being said, the art in Biophile Kolga is really cool. It's really unique. I would love to show the pages that I liked the most, but I'm not going to spoil anything. You'll just have to see it for yourself. I'll break my review down into 4 parts: story, setting, characters, and themes, and give you my opinion on each of those pieces of the story out of 5. I won't be giving any spoilers in this review as I want you to be able to get into the work and enjoy it completely fresh without my opinion on specific incidents, but we will be going deep on some more general points. The story surrounds 3 primary characters: Kolga, June, and Stu, a curious talking magical eyeball. From my understanding of the story from reading all 6 chapters, it's clear that Kolga was involved in some kind of controversial initiative that certain authorities in her world disapprove of. She appears to be some sort of Batman-like character where she's pretty wealthy, she has a lot of technical skills, a lot of fighting skills, and a lot of competency, and she has an assistant, June, who doesn't have as much experience. She seems a lot younger, a little wet behind the ears, but she does have some combat and fighting skills, and she seems to help Kolga out whenever Kolga wants to achieve something or do something. She goes with her. She's kind of her sidekick. And Stu appears to be this magical eyeball who's kind of held hostage in this lantern by Kolga, and it's insinuated that there's a lot more importance to his character as at some point in the story he is kidnapped by a interesting group of folks. This is where my understanding of the story kind of stops. Each chapter, there's a series of different plot points. Some of them involve June, some of them involve Stu, but none of them feel in sync with the greater story. For example, there's a scene where Kolga is sort of being interrogated by these authorities that want to know more about her involvement in this controversial initiative. But it doesn't really feel to have continuity with the rest of the story as it continues. We're never revisited to what happened at this interrogation, and it doesn't seem to have had any consequence on Kolga. Each chapter almost feels like they stand alone as separate episodes rather than a continuous story in the comic, and this might very well have been the intention. In chapter 5, it focuses on a very big fight, which is pivotal to understanding certain aspects of Kolga's background. But her companion stories somewhat feel a little bit sidelined. June, Kolga's somewhat sidekick, has a very interesting caveat to her fighting abilities, but it's only addressed once and it's never really expounded on again. Stu's background is completely shrouded in mystery for the most part, but there are some details given that insinuate that he is a major player in the overall story. As you can see, my review for this section is quite sparse because I found the story a bit difficult to understand. There are some points which are clear to me, and most of those points involve Kolga because we're actually seeing what happens. We see her being interrogated. We hear her talking to June about some aspects of her past. So there's some clearness there, but I feel like there's an overall goal that seems to be lacking from the story, and perhaps that's why I'm having trouble seeing the continuity from one chapter to the next. There are elements of a strong narrative flow, but at times, many of the plot points just felt disjointed from one to another. Basically, where are we going and how and why are we gonna get there? For story, I would give Biophile Kolga a 3 out of 5. Okay, now let's talk setting. I feel that the setting is the weakest aspect of Biophile Kolga. My assumption is that it's based off of 19th century Europe, but there's not really any strong indication of that aside from some of the buildings, a ship at one point, and some of the interior styles. The focus isn't really on the backgrounds, and this is where I feel like the setting kind of falls short. In manga, which is my typical medium, it's very important to keep the reader in the particular setting that the characters are in. So for example, you'll see it may not be a fully drawn background, but it will be some aspect of a background, a floor, a tree, a sky, something to keep you tethered to where the characters are at any given moment. But in Biophile Kolga, there are a lot of gradients and colors which take you out of the current location of the scene, and this could feel a little disorienting at times. The setting usually is how a reader can stay grounded into the base of where is the story taking place and what is the assumed time period that the story is taking place. And that's something that can better help them understand the story when they have no clue what's going on with the plot. So this is an area I think was a missed opportunity to kind of show more architecture, show more of the interiors, and also kind of help keep that, like I referred to in the story section, continuity between what's happening from one scene to the next. There in the interrogation scene that I mentioned in the story section is a moment where someone calls her. I don't know what the device is. It's June calling her because there's an incident happening and she needs her help. And you never get to see that device. You don't get to see is it a phone? Is it a pager? Is it a magical item? You don't get to see what that is. And that's one of the pieces of world building and setting that helps you understand the context of where the story is taking place. So for me, I would give setting a 2 out of 5 just because I feel like there was a real missed opportunity to show us what the world that Kolga lives in is like. Let's move on to characters, and this is the part where I stopped caring that I didn't understand what was going on with the story, and I started enjoying the story. This, in my mind, is the strongest part of Biophile Kolga, and it actually instilled my belief that characters are more important than anything in the story. If you can make good characters, then your story can carry itself. So let's start with Kolga, who is our main heroine. She's broody, contemplative, competent, intelligent. She's an excellent fighter. The list of Kolga's achievements goes on. The story focuses on her, and she's a pretty good example of a kick-ass heroine. She's serious, yet she does show vulnerability at times and has a dark past that she navigates throughout the comic. I'm always a major fan of female characters in action-based, non-traditionally female-centered roles, so I was very excited to see the two main characters are both women. I thought that was super cool. That being said, Miss Kolga does show signs of having a significant amount of plot armor, which can feel a little dare I say, Mary Sue-ish at times. She's all of the things I mentioned earlier, as well as being able to regenerate her wounds at will. She also has a fairly complex and tragic backstory, which also kind of fits into that description, that Mary Sue description. Now, I found a podcast where one of the creators of Biophile Kolga addressed the idea of Kolga being a Mary Sue. He rebuts this in what I think is a very compelling way, by saying that Kolga's competency has come from failing a million times before getting good. And I think this is a very good explanation. I only wish we would have seen a bit more of that perspective from her character in the comic, though. Other than that, Kolga's design is super cool, and it's always great to see cool female characters doing cool stuff in comics. Let's move on to June. June is a character that serves as somewhat of a sidekick to Kolga. She's young, she's a little naive, and she does have the capacity for cute, sarcastic humor, so she's pretty contrasting to Kolga, which I thought was an excellent decision. The two characters' contrast works really well. Beyond that, June possesses some incredibly interesting powers and ailments that make her a pretty compelling character. I think she brings a significantly more lighthearted tone to the story, which I think serves as an excellent contrast to Kolga. She does seem to have a little bit of an opaque history herself as well, so it leaves you wanting a little bit more, which is great. I love that. Both of those two characters together make a great duo, and I think this is really the shining element of this comic. Lastly, there is Stu, an incredibly strange magical eye that has some extremely powerful abilities, as well as a penchant for slapstick humor. Stu is the comic relief of the trio, which I think is completely necessary, and similarly to June, it's a welcome thing to have with the overall dark undertone of the story at large. This type of humor can absolutely be an acquired taste, as, you know, sometimes Stu takes you out of the seriousness of the moment to make a joke that may or may not be funny. Nonetheless, he serves a great purpose of injecting a bit of levity and humor into the story. So overall, I give the characters in Biophile Kolga a 4 out of 5. The main characters each stand on their own in different ways, and they all have their own strengths. While it's clear that Kolga is the star of the show, sometimes I feel that she loses her appeal by being just a bit too perfect. My favorite character was June, who I feel like is a lot more balanced and relatable to the audience, who may not know what the heck is going on. Despite my having trouble understanding the plot at certain points, it was the characters that kept me reading and their dialogue that kept me interested. And so I truly believe if you can have compelling and interesting characters, you can work out all of the storyline kinks as you go, because your characters will keep the audience entertained and keep them wanting to know what happens next, even if they could barely understand what happened before. So awesome, awesome work with these cool characters in Biophile Kolga. And lastly, let's talk about some of the themes of Biophile Kolga. This is also a very important part of storytelling, and I wanted to touch on this too. Some of the themes that I've picked up on in Biophile Kolga are betrayal, trust, confronting the past, and the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. So pretty deep, pretty heavy stuff. The themes are strong, and they're present all throughout the 6 chapters of the story. Basically, as you're reading this comic, you see a stream of Kolga's inner thoughts throughout everything that occurs, which is a cool thing to be able to get into the inner mind and the inner workings of a character to see that, right? That said, there is, in my view, a heavy present and ambient focus on these themes narratively, which at times it feels a little abstract and can be a bit distracting. For example, a lot of Kolga's thoughts are depicted with red text boxes, and sometimes I found myself trying to understand what Kolga was saying in her thoughts in these red text boxes and kind of losing sight of what was currently happening through the dialogue with the characters. So I do feel like it could be a little bit distracting, but if you zoom out and you look at the artistic aspect, you look at the abstract aspect, and you know, you try to consume it in a more, I guess, artistic approach, it is very strong. I mean, the whole comic revolves around Kolga's inner workings, and I think that that was portrayed very strongly. For themes, I give the themes in this comic a 4 out of 5. They're dramatic and they're interesting, and they open up a lot of poignant questions about Kolga's past and her greater purpose in the narrative at large. And I think they fit into the overall dark vibe and contributes to a very strong, somewhat abstract and artistic approach to the narrative in this story. Overall, Biophile Kolga was a very interesting comic read for me. While I found the story to be a bit disjointed and confusing, I was kind of reeled back into turning the pages because of the fun and interesting characters that have their own strong personalities. And it really instilled my belief that strong characters can really push your story just that much further, where other elements of your story might kind of be lacking a bit. I do think that if you give it a chance, you might have a completely different opinion than me, but this is just my thought about the importance of characters and how they can really, really shine in a comic that you're writing. It's something that I yap about all day on this channel. So thanks to the creators of Biophile Kolga for sending this my way and trusting me to give an honest and detailed review of this work. And if you'd like to check them out, they've got an Indiegogo campaign that is supposed to be starting pretty soon, so you can go check them out over there. And if you've got a work that you'd like me to review, whether it's your own or you just want to know what I think about any sort of comic or manga, feel free to shoot it my way. You can email me or leave it in the comments below, and we can see if that's something everybody wants to see. Until next time, bye!